type on his phone all night. Okay, it's my great honor, and it's pretty darn exciting for me to welcome our next storyteller, the prodigal son of the Kenosha Writers Guild, Mr. JImJanus. I like to think of Jim as something of a Renaissance man. And it's not just because of his proclivity for powdered wigs and fluffy shirts, but it's because he's studied various forms of creative writing. He's written poetry and plays, studied with a renowned Chicago dramatist, and he's very versatile, and he's written award-winning fiction. So please welcome back from the heart of darkness of the netherworld known as Illinois, Mr. JImJanus.
Thanks, Dave, for that fun introduction. So here we are. It's April 2018 already, almost May 2018. 30 years ago, it was May 1988, and I graduated from college. So back then, I was 22 years old and still living at home with my parents. And I didn't have a job yet, mainly because I hadn't started looking for one. I was a little bit of a homebody, and that makes me think that when I would start looking for a job, one thing I didn't want is a job that would require me to travel. So that Monday in May after graduation, I was taking it pretty easy. At my mom and dad's house, I decided to sleep late. I was sleeping in. And the house was really quiet. It's my dad. He was at work. My couple of siblings, they were at work. My mom, well, she was in the house. And I'm sure she was thinking that I should be up looking for a job. So I mentioned the house was pretty quiet. It was, and then it changed. As I'm laying in bed, I can hear this sound in the distance within the house, like zzzz. And then it started getting a little closer and a little louder, like zzzz. And then it got really loud. It was right by my door. I was like, it was the vacuum cleaner. This was my mom's way of motivating me. So I just waited for the sound to go away. I didn't get up. But now I was awake. So I'm laying there in bed and I'm thinking, okay, so I've got this degree in computer science. What should I do with it? And then I started thinking, why was I even interested in computers to begin with? So I started thinking back to these old science fiction movies that I liked. And you guys kind of remember the scene, like a general scene of a big laboratory with a wall-to-wall computer, big steel cabinets with these arrays of blinking lights of all different colors and all these knobs and switches and dials. And then there's the computer tones, like a gurgling, bubbling. And then there's one guy, like a guy in this white lab coat, and he's looking at this printout that just came out of this machine with these rows of numbers on it. And he's scratching his head, and then he goes back to his keyboard to adjust something. That's the job that I wanted. Now, also in May 1988, there was a company called Wallace Computer Services, and they needed a computer programmer right away. So they called up a nearby university, Northern Illinois, and they talked to their computer science department and said, hey, do you have any recent graduates who are still looking for a job? So the department gave Wallace the name of the one guy who hadn't yet reported back that he got a job. So back to the Janus house on that May morning, after my mom finished vacuuming, the phone rang. And that was Wallace Computer Services calling my mom and dad's house to talk to me. So I went in, did the interview, they offered me the job. So my first day now at Wallace, they assigned me a desk. And so it's a desk, and it's got this big mainframe terminal on it, and then next to it's a telephone. And around this desk is a cubicle, 3 cubicle walls. And this cubicle is within this big room. And all around this big room are a bunch of other cubicles. There's no other computer equipment around. So Wallace Computer Services, their business was business forms. They sold and manufactured them. And my job was to write these computer programs that calculated their sales and profits. Well, I got pretty good at this, and I did a good job, and after a few years, they rewarded me by sending me on the road. In particular, they sent me to Tennessee, small town in Tennessee where they had a manufacturing plant. And this plant was in need of a computer system. But before they sent me down there, they wanted me to have a partner. They wanted a guy who was familiar with this mid-range kind of technology and somebody who could relate to the people in the plants. So they brought in this guy named Nick. And Nick, he was a 32-year-old, divorced Italian from the south side of Chicago. He had this salt and pepper long hair that flowed over the back of his collar. And speaking of collar, when I looked at this guy in his shirt and tie, he looked really awkward, like the manager of a grocery store. Oh yeah, and another thing, this guy had a Fu Manchu mustache. And whenever he talked, he swore all the time. If Nick was talking, he was swearing. So we knew right off that he and I were total opposites. But we hung out after work, so we're working there at Wallace Computer Services. We're not in Tennessee yet, and we'd go to this bar just a little ways down the road. We were in Hillside, just off of Roosevelt Road. So one night we go to the bar, and we're both in my car. I'm driving, and the hardest thing you got to do is just get out of the parking lot and turn left on Roosevelt. Pretty tough to do during rush hour. There's a lot of traffic. So I'm in the driver's seat, and I'm waiting for this big break in traffic so I can make the left turn. And Nick is getting more and more frustrated that I'm not taking advantage of these little breaks in the traffic that he thinks I can just shoot out in. So I'm waiting and waiting. He's getting more and more frustrated. Well, finally, I just turn right. And now we're headed away from the bar. And Nick is like, oh, I hate this. Well, then I saw there was no oncoming traffic. So I whipped the car into a U-turn, a successful U-turn. And then Nick is like, I love it. So we get over to this bar, Downey's Little Tavern. You have to step over this Irish wolfhound that's right in the doorway. And then there, Nick would tell me his little philosophies in life, like, when it comes to naked pictures, always take them, never give them. So we'd hang out together like that. Oh yeah, and I just thought of something. That exit coming out of the parking lot to Roosevelt Road. So again, this is Wallace Computer Services in Hillside, Illinois, just off Roosevelt Road. So Hillside's like this midpoint between the west side of Chicago and the affluent western suburbs. So on this road, Roosevelt Road, you can get all different types of characters driving back and forth. So as an example, one night around that same week, I step out of work, and so I step into the parking lot, and I notice there's a broken down car right by that exit to Roosevelt Road. So this is in the evening, and this is like an old car, like maybe a late 70s Buick Electra, this green color. And I can tell it's broken down because there's a big pool of antifreeze underneath it. And there's a woman standing next to it, like maybe in her 60s, and she looks kind of frazzled, and she's wearing this flower dress that looks like it's from the same era as the car. So, I want to help a little bit, so I walk over to her and ask her, like, hey, do you need, can I help? Do you need to use the phone or something? And she said, well, I'm trying to get back out to Wheaton, to my place in Wheaton, and I really don't know who to even call. Now, this lady didn't look too threatening, and at the time, I lived in Lombard, which was straight west on Roosevelt Road, just short of Wheaton. So I looked at her and I said, hey, that's the way I'm going. If you want, I can just drive you to your place. So she accepted my offer, got in the car, and we started on our way. Now, I don't remember too much about that conversation. I just remember that she seemed a little eccentric. And then I was thinking, like, hey, she lives in in Wheaton, maybe this lady's rich. Maybe this lady's got money. Maybe there's something in it for me other than, just doing a nice thing. So we're driving along. Well, then she starts talking to me about her boyfriend. His name's Bud. And Bud is a butcher. Well, after about 25 minutes, we get to Wheaton and we get to this lady's place. And it's not a mansion. It's like a really simple apartment complex. So I drop her off, and she says thank you, and she kind of apologizes for not, compensating me in any way. That's fine. So she goes on her way, and I head back home. Now let me jump in the story again. Let's get to the Tennessee part. So me and Nick, we finally get down to Tennessee. We're on our first trip to this plant. We're in the Memphis International Airport, and we got to rent a car. But first I want to mention that Nick did draw a little attention of the authorities, I guess probably because he was dressed in these long, camouflage pants, and he had a white Dago tee, and he's carrying this ridiculously large carry-on bag, and sticking out of it are the ends of all these computer cables. Well, we finally get to our rental car, and then Nick's like, oh, I think you should drive. I want to take a rest. It was a pretty early flight. We were both pretty tired. So he makes me drive this 60 miles southwest through the Tennessee flatlands. And we're driving along. He's resting. Well, he wakes up right when I'm entering Tipton County. And it was just in time for Nick to see this young woman along the side of the road walking. And she's got on these tight cutoffs and this short red top. And she's got her arm out and her thumb up. And I drive by her, and Nick starts yelling at me saying, pull over, pick her up. And I keep driving, and he's like, what are you doing? You don't pass something up like that. Well, we finally get to the plant, and we get greeted by the plant manager, me and Nick. And the plant manager was kind of hesitant on greeting us until Nick introduced himself, because we found out later, up until that point, the plant manager thought that I had picked up a hitchhiker. This was Nick, who I got to work with. So that was our first day in the plant, and our job was that first day just load the application onto the computer and then start doing a little testing, making sure things work. Well, instead what we did was we spent most of that day assembling tables that these computer terminals were going to go on. Well, we get through this day, we get to the end, and then Nick asks the plant manager, hey, is there any place around here to get a drink? And the plant manager says, yeah, there's two places. There's the Little Hatchie, and there's the High Cotton. He goes, I recommend going to the Little Hatchie. It's safer. Well, that night, now Nick wants to drive the rental car. I get in there with him, and we end up at the less safe High Cotton. So this place was a roadhouse, like Covington, Tennessee's in the middle of nowhere. It takes you an hour to get to, if you want to go to a respectable dinner. It's a roadhouse. Think 1976, the movie Walking Tall, the story of Buford Pusser. Any of the establishments in that movie, that was like this, the High Cotton. So over in the corner is a pool table, and it's very poorly lit. The only illumination over this table is this cord that's going up over a rafter, and it's hanging down right into a bare incandescent bulb, with a partial cage around it. It was a mechanic's lamp. That's how they lit up the pool table. So Nick and I would spend hours, playing pool with the locals, and then we would head back to our rooms over at the Days Inn Motel. Well, after about 10 days of that, pretty much doing the same thing every day and the same thing every night, we finally got phase one of this project done, and Wallace called us back to take a break, come back to Hillside for a week. So now here we are back in Hillside, and I'm sitting at my desk, and it's in the afternoon. I'm working away at my computer, touching up some programs for when we go back out to Tennessee. And then I hear this voice behind me, a woman's voice that I didn't recognize. Jim? And I turn around. It's the lady from Wheaton. She's standing right there in the office behind me. Nobody else, nobody escorted her. She's just standing there. So I'm in shock. I stand up right away. And she says, I just wanted to thank you again for driving me home that night. And, I was about to say, like, how did you get in here or whatever? And she says, I want you to come out in the parking lot and meet Bud. So actually, I welcomed this idea because it was the one sure way I could make sure to get her out of the building. So I walked with her. We walk into the parking lot. Sure enough, there's that late 70s Buick Electra, and I could see somebody in a passenger seat. So I walk over to the passenger door. She brings me over there, opens up the door, and there's Bud. This guy, he's a little bit overweight. He's wearing like sweats and a dirty T-shirt, and he's got on this horn-rimmed glasses with really thick lenses. He doesn't look like he's all there. And he hands me this box, this carton, about that size, white carton. And the woman says, I told you that Bud's a butcher. We wanted you to have this. So go ahead and open it. So I take this carton and I kind of carefully lift the lid. The thing is totally unmarked. And inside are like 4 vacuum-packed frozen T-bones. I was still kind of freaked out about this whole thing, and so I just closed it and nicely said thank you, and I've got to get back into work now, and goodbye. So I headed back in to the building, and not far from the door was Nick. He was kind of looking out the window. And I'm like, well, how did she get in here? Did you let her in? And he looked at me and he said, I thought she was your mother. So a few more days went by. We got all prepared for the next Tennessee trip, and then there we are back in Covington, Tennessee. And we ramp up at the plant, do a lot of training, and on the last couple of days, I had to train 3rd shift. So I would come back pretty early in the morning to the hotel, like 8 o'clock or so, and then try to sleep. So on one of those last days, I'm back at the Days Inn motel, trying to get some sleep. I'm laying in the bed and I'm starting to drift off. And then I hear in the hallway, this, it's getting a little louder, and then a little on the door. Somebody's vacuuming the hallway at the Days Inn. And then that just made me kind of sit back and think, like, what was it that I did in college again? Why did I go to college? And how is it that I ended up in Covington, Tennessee with Nick? Thank you.